I know a lot of tools out there can be kind of overwhelming, saying like, oh, you need to do all this research, you need to read a ton, you need to learn about story progression, but forget everything else that you've heard. These are my top 3 tips that I cannot do without when writing a romance book, particularly writing your first romance book. And honestly, probably the hardest thing is to just get something on the page. So that's what I want to help you with. I feel like it's a lot easier than it seems. Like, of course, it's a lot of work to write a book. I'm not discounting my work and a bunch of other authors' work. I feel like it's achievable, and even if you don't end up publishing it, it's fun to just express yourself on the page through another character's lens. I feel like with romance in particular, there is a way to hack all of that makes it so much easier, because romance is based off of usually contemporary scenarios, which we already know pretty well. And if you want to do a genre outside of that, that might be more complicated, but most of the time, my first tip I feel like would be the best option to go with for your first romance book ever. And that would be write what you want to read. You might have heard that before, but in order to actually get through a project and finish writing a book, I find that this is my #1 most important tip possible for writing any genre. And so yes, maybe you do have to read romance, but have you watched movies that you like that have romance in it? What things in them do you like from those movies and from those books, or anything that you consume with romance in it that you find are really engaging and would keep you reading? Like, if you heard about the story, would you want to read about it? That will also coincide usually with things that you're very familiar with. So if you think of like the first thing on top of your head that you really love reading about, it's probably something that you're familiar with. Either you've consumed a lot of media with that, or you have some lived experience that you can share with it. For example, I play a lot of Sims, so it would be fun to do some type of gaming romance where like the 2 main characters are gamers, and I would know that very well. I wouldn't have to do a ton of research because #1, I love talking about it and I can blab on about it forever. #2, I'm very familiar with it and I've had like years of experience of playing games, and particularly The Sims 4. That would be a great topic for me to use. And not necessarily that you have to, like, you have to be careful in copying exact things, of course, but what I'm talking about is more of like an imaginary situation involved around similar games like that I think would be pretty fun to read. Like, if I saw a book that was like, oh, these 2 met because they love this life sim game, it would be really engaging and grab my attention right away. I would be the target audience, which means I would be great at writing about it because your enthusiasm is going to be felt through the pages. #2, my next tip, if you're getting overwhelmed with how to structure a plot and have a story have a beginning, middle, and end, or have like a rising action and climax, all that resolution and all that stuff, there's a couple of rules that are really basic with romance that I think are very easy to replicate, but my easiest way to explain it would be to pick your plot progression based on how you want the relationship to grow. So for example, with my book, My Shy Alpha, I knew that I wanted the characters to be fated mates and I wanted them to meet at the beginning of the novel, and then we figure out what happens in their relationship once they get to know each other, because they have this really deep connection really quickly, and then they have all these other problems in their lives and they're coming together, and how do those things mesh, and how do the external forces impact their relationship, especially when the main character has trouble trusting. So that is my story progression in that story, is based on how first the main character's in one state of her life, she meets Noah, then Noah and her interact, they get to know each other, then they start to grow closer and there's some external outside problems thrown in, but still it's very centered around their relationship. And then they, towards the end of the book, are at the deepest, and it circles back around to the beginning to where Aaliyah's problems at the beginning of the book, she has found now some more resolution within herself, but it was through that relationship. In romance, the relationships are the central part of the story. So you want your plot to be based on how that relationship moves. So if you have a story where the characters, it's a slow burn, or maybe enemies to lovers, or maybe friends to lovers, where at the beginning they kind of know each other, maybe they don't like each other, or they already have a history and there's a lot of complex history that's keeping them from dating, they would have to go through the progression of growing closer in a more romantic way throughout the book in order to end up together at the end. But it would be up to you. Do you want the romance to flip and then at the beginning, like maybe you're turning it on its head, where the enemies to lovers trope, like you're starting at the end of that where they used to be enemies, then they start to like each other, but what happens after? Like, do they still get along once they establish that, or are they going to go back to being enemies? That would be an example, a couple examples of how the plot is driven by the relationship. If you can think about all the little steps within meeting someone, getting to know them, involving them in your life in a deeper way, and then how that turns out. Do you stay together, or is it, to be honest, you probably need to have a happy ending. That is one of the main rules I was going to mention for this. So how are you going to take all of that and have a happy ending where either they end up together or the characters are happy on their own in a separate way, or it's a why choose? You know, all of that is centered just around how the relationship grows. And I find that looking at it that way from, okay, I'm putting these two characters together, what's going to happen between them? That is so much more clear in my mind, instead of like thinking through all of the like technicalities of different beats. Of course, those are very helpful. They're always helpful, but there's not like a required way to do that. And I find that a lot of romances are really interesting when they kind of switch it up the progression in that way. As long as there's enough conflict in it, whether it's between them or outside forces that are meddling in their happiness to where by the end you want to give them that happy ending, I think it should work out really well. And my third and final tip might seem really silly. Okay, so I'm gonna describe it in two ways. One way I like to describe this is to write like you're talking to a friend. The other way I like to describe this is to write shittily. Just to be blunt. I mean, when you're talking to a friend, you're not gonna have the most perfect, like, eloquent, detailed descriptions of everything. Like, you would tell them the best parts about your story. You would tell a friend the scenario and the emotions you were feeling in your responses, because that's the interesting part. And with romance, usually it's so much about, like, personal relationships and the main character's personal thoughts. Even if it's third person, you are still telling their experience. So you want to make sure that it feels relatable. It doesn't have to be overly complex. Like, I know a lot of writers, when they first start out, they feel like, ooh, I have to make this look really nice. Like, I have to write really nicely, and that can be a huge roadblock that prevents you from writing. I feel like I would rather write when it's time to write and then edit when it's time to edit. Maybe I didn't describe things the most beautifully or most eloquently that I could ever, but is that really what my readers are coming for? Maybe they want to hear certain descriptions that then I can add back in the editing stage and revising stage, but when I'm just telling the story, I just want to give them the most interesting parts possible to keep them reading and feeling like it's making progress. It's a much more interesting time if a lot of interesting plot points happen in the story rather than getting stuck on certain parts just for the sake of writing nicely. Honestly, I do feel like it actually can do the opposite of what you would want, which is when you finish a book, you're handing it off to readers to read and enjoy. It's no longer yours to edit and mull through and change. It's now theirs to enjoy. And if they can't enjoy it because it's become difficult for them to read, a lot of people are looking for romance as an escape in particular. So there is some freedom in having it be, you know, it doesn't have to be overly complicated. It doesn't have to have all of these like super eloquent, perfectly edited phrases. Like, even character dialogue, that should probably be really casual, unless it's part of their character to not be casual. You can even push it to the extreme of like super casual, like a ton of slang, if that's their personality. And if that's the person that it's coming from, you would want that to be within every single part of the story. Just like if someone was really strict with their belief systems or they're really uptight, you'd probably want to tighten that up and make them sound more official. But I don't feel like you have to go to the next level and be like poetry level, like like that's way too much pressure for a story that is supposed to be fun and a quick read. So just to recap, if this is your very first romance novel and you're really struggling on how to write and how to get to that ending of the book, my 3 main tips as a romance author are: number 1, write what you want to read. If this was something that you picked up and it's something that you are already interested in, that is a great starting point, especially for a first book, because then you are lessening the amount of time that you have to do all this extra research, and putting yourself in those shoes is going to be easier and feel more authentic and exciting to the reader when it's exciting for you. Number 2, pick your plot progression based on the relationship you're featuring in the book. Rather than having to force yourself into a traditional story structure, think about how you want that relationship to evolve throughout the story. And number 3, write like you're talking to a friend. And that means to write when it's time to write and then edit when it's time to edit. It doesn't have to be perfect on the first go. Get it down in a way that is engaging for you and the person listening to the story, or reading the story in this sense. But if you're imagining that you're talking to a friend, how would your main character talk to their friends about this wild journey that you're writing about, of them finding their relationship? So I hope that helps. Just one final thought of mine is that I really believe it is important to have more and more voices. So I would not strive or recommend striving for perfection. I would recommend striving for something that you love and enjoy, because that's first of all going to come off on the page, but it's also going to be an experience that you will never forget. So it's very exciting if you're starting on this and being interested. And don't get caught up on, oh, like, what if I publish this? Right now, this story is for you while you're writing, and maybe you won't publish it, and that's okay. It's still going to be a worthwhile experience to teach yourself how to write, and also just do something that is a creative self-expression. Then maybe you will publish it. In that case, maybe someone else will love it as much as you do. In order to get there, don't get caught up in forcing yourself into perfection. There's always room to grow and edit. That's what editing is for. I completely believe in you, and I want you to go for it. So please go for it. Write it down, even if you're having to write notes like you're texting a friend. Get it down that way, just the basis of the story to start with, and go for it. You can do this. I believe in you. Thanks for stopping by to watch another one of my videos. I post videos every single Saturday now. Please let me know in the comments, where have you gotten stuck in writing your very first novel? Or even if it's not your first novel, where do you usually get stuck in writing? So if you'd like to make sure to catch my video next week, please make sure to subscribe, and I will see you next weekend for not only my next video, but the Simmers for Palestine event. So I will see you on Twitch too. I hope you're having a great day. Bye.